The first thing Lieutenant Commander Kestrel, Vixen, Thorne noticed wasn't the sound of incoming aircraft. It was the silence that preceded it. A peculiar stillness that settled over forward operating base Meridian like a held breath, where even the desert wind seemed to pause in anticipation. She stood at the edge of the makeshift runway, binoculars pressed against her weathered face, scanning the horizon where heat waves danced like ghosts above the sand dunes. Radars picking up multiple contacts, bearing 270, altitude Angels 15 and dropping fast, crackled Sergeant Major Rodriguez's voice through her headset. The veteran ground controller's tone carried that particular edge that meant trouble was inbound. Count shows 4. No, make that 6 hostiles. Pattern suggests close air support run. Vixen lowered her binoculars, her steel-gray eyes narrowing as she processed the information. 6 aircraft meant serious business, too many for a probe, too few for a full assault. It was the kind of number that suggested someone was testing their defenses, probing for weaknesses. She'd seen this before in the dusty valleys of Afghanistan and the urban sprawl of Iraq, where every shadow could hide death and every moment of quiet preceded chaos. "Time to intercept," she asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. Negative on friendly air support. Storm front grounded everything at Kandahar. We're looking at 20 minutes minimum before we get fast movers in the air. 20 minutes. In aerial combat terms, that was an eternity. Vixen's fingers instinctively traced the worn patch on her flight suit, a crimson fox silhouette with crossed daggers, earned through 3 tour and more close calls than she cared to count. The other pilots called her Vixen partly for her red hair, partly for her cunning in the cockpit, but mostly because she had a habit of surviving situations that should have killed her. The base around her buzzed with sudden activity. Marines sprinted toward defensive positions, their boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Vehicle engines roared to life. The sharp crack of weapons being chambered echoed across the compound. But Vixen remained still, her mind already calculating angles, distances, and possibilities that others couldn't see. "Rodriguez," she said quietly into her headset, "what's our inventory on the MAN-PADS?" "2 Stingers, both functional. Why?" His voice carried skepticism. Everyone knew shoulder-fired missiles were notoriously unreliable against fast-moving jets. "Because sometimes," Vixen murmured, watching the horizon where 6 death machines approached through waves of heat, "the impossible shot is the only one worth taking." The desert held its breath, and somewhere in that silence, destiny began to unfold. The command bunker erupted in controlled chaos as radar screens painted their electronic picture of approaching doom. Major Harrison Webb, the base commander, stood behind the primary display, his square jaw working silently as he absorbed the tactical situation. Around him, communications specialists relayed updates in the clipped, professional tones that barely masked their underlying tension. "Contacts now at 15 miles and closing. Estimated airspeed 400 knots," Sergeant Rodriguez reported, his fingers dancing across the radar console. "Flight pattern suggests Syrian MiG-29s. Probable weapons load includes air-to-surface missiles." Webb's eyes found Vixen as she entered the bunker, her flight suit dusty from the desert wind. The other officers in the room, mostly men who'd served under Webb for months, exchanged glances that carried years of unspoken judgment. To them, she was still the pilot who'd been grounded after the incident at Bagram, the one who'd supposedly frozen during a critical moment. The official report had been sanitized, but rumors in military circles had a way of growing like cancer. "Thorne," Webb's voice cut through the ambient noise, "I need you on defensive coordination. Work with Rodriguez on targeting solutions for our ground-based systems." "Sir, with respect," Vixen stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension crackling through the air. "I should be in the air, not coordinating from the ground." A bitter laugh came from Captain Marcus Blade Peterson, the base's senior pilot, whose perfectly pressed uniform seemed to mock the dust and grit that defined life at Meridian. Right, because that worked out so well last time. His comment drew snickers from two junior officers near the communications array. The words hit Vixen like shrapnel, each syllable designed to wound. She'd heard variations of this taunt for months, ever since the official inquiry that had ended with her flying a desk instead of combat missions. But she didn't flinch, didn't allow her expression to betray the rage building behind her eyes. "Contacts now at 12 miles," Rodriguez interrupted, his voice cutting through the uncomfortable moment. "Altitude dropping to Angels 10. They're definitely inbound for an attack run." Webb studied the radar display, then glanced at the weather report showing the storm system that had grounded their air support. His calculation was simple and brutal: 6 enemy aircraft against a forward operating base with minimal air defenses. The mathematics of war rarely favored the defender in situations like this. "Peterson, get our remaining ground crews to disperse the helicopters. Maximum separation," Webb ordered. "Thorne, I want targeting solutions for both Stinger positions. Make every shot count because we won't get many chances." "Understood, sir." Vixen's response was crisp, professional. But as she moved toward the tactical display, her mind was already working through scenarios that the others couldn't imagine, trajectories and timing that existed in the narrow space between impossible and inevitable. Outside, the desert silence had become pregnant with approaching thunder. The Stinger missile launcher felt heavier than its 34 pounds should have as Vixen hefted it onto her shoulder, checking the battery coolant unit with practiced efficiency. Corporal Maria Santos, barely 22, with intelligent dark eyes that held too much experience for her age, knelt beside the second launcher, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands. "Ma'am," Santos whispered, "my father flew Phantoms in Vietnam. He always said the sky has a way of humbling pilots who think they know everything." Vixen adjusted the weapon's grip, feeling the familiar weight settle against her shoulder. "Your father was a wise man, Santos. What else did he tell you?" "That sometimes the ground teaches lessons the cockpit can't." Santos's voice carried a tremor that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with understanding. She'd seen Vixen's personnel file, knew about the incident that had grounded one of the military's most decorated female pilots. The approaching aircraft were visible now as dark specks against the brass-colored sky, their forms growing larger with each passing second. Through her binoculars, Vixen could make out the distinctive twin-tail configuration of MiG-29 Fulcrums, their gray camouflage schemes making them appear like predatory sharks against the desert backdrop. "Rodriguez, I need constant updates on range and bearing." She spoke into her headset, her voice carrying across the communications network to every defender on the base. "Roger, Vixen. Lead aircraft now at 8 miles, bearing 265, altitude dropping through Angels 8. Formation is maintaining tight fingertip, suggesting they're planning a coordinated strike." 8 miles. At their current speed, that meant roughly 90 seconds until weapons range. Vixen's mind automatically calculated intercept angles, accounting for the MiG's approach vector and the Stinger's engagement envelope. The mathematics were unforgiving. Shoulder-fired missiles had a maximum effective range of roughly 3 miles against fast-moving jets, with optimal engagement occurring at much closer distances. "Santos, remember your training. Wait for the tone, lead the target, and squeeze. Don't jerk the trigger." "Yes, ma'am." Santos's reply was steady now, the tremor gone from her voice. In the distance, the MiGs had begun their attack approach, dropping to barely 1,000 feet above the desert floor. Their pilots were skilled, maintaining formation while executing the kind of low-level approach that would minimize their exposure to surface-to-air missiles. But skill and training were two-edged swords. The same tactics that protected them also made their flight path predictable to someone who understood aerial warfare. Vixen closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the desert wind against her face, listening to the growing thunder of approaching jet engines. In her mind, she could see the three-dimensional chess game unfolding above them, each aircraft's position and vector creating opportunities that existed for only seconds before vanishing forever. 6 miles and closing, Rodriguez's voice crackled through static. They're definitely inbound for attack run. The moment of truth was approaching. The lead MiG broke from formation first, peeling away in a graceful arc that spoke of pilot confidence and tactical precision. Major Alexander Petrov, call sign Wolverine, had flown over 200 combat missions in Syria, his aircraft bearing the scars of countless engagements against both rebel forces and unfortunate coalition aircraft that had strayed too close to defended airspace. Through his canopy, the American forward operating base spread below like a detailed diorama, prefabricated buildings, vehicle parks, and the telltale patterns of defensive positions. Intelligence had indicated minimal air defenses, making this mission more of a demonstration than a genuine combat operation. Moscow wanted to send a message about respecting Syrian airspace, and 6 Fulcrums carrying precision ordnance delivered that message with unmistakable clarity. Wolverine lead to Wolverine flight, Petrov's voice carried across the tactical frequency in accented English, a psychological touch designed to unnerve any American monitoring their communications. Target acquisition confirmed. Commence attack run on my mark. His wingman, Captain Viktor Kozlov, acknowledged with professional brevity. Wolverine 2 target locked, ready for engagement. Below them, the desert base appeared almost peaceful in the late afternoon sunlight. Petrov's targeting system had already identified the primary objectives: fuel storage tanks, aircraft hangars, and the communications array that connected this isolated outpost to the wider American military network. The mission parameters were clear: inflict maximum damage with minimal risk, then return to base with footage that would play well on state television. But as Petrov rolled into his attack dive, something nagged at his tactical awareness. The base seemed too quiet, too still. His experience in urban combat had taught him to recognize the difference between genuine calm and the artificial stillness that preceded well-planned ambushes. Wolverine 3, report thermal signatures from target area, he ordered. Minimal heat sources detected, lead. Base appears to be operating with skeleton crew. The response should have been reassuring, but Petrov's instincts remained troubled. 3 wars had taught him that American military personnel rarely abandoned defensive positions without good reason. Either they were better concealed than his sensors could detect, or they were preparing something unexpected. Wolverine flight, maintain formation discipline. Execute attack run as briefed, but stay alert for surface-to-air threats. Below, 2 small figures moved between buildings with purposeful urgency. Petrov's enhanced optics couldn't make out details, but something about their movement patterns suggested military training. One appeared to be carrying equipment, possibly a communications pack or electronic warfare device. Range to target now 4 miles, his weapons officer reported. KH-29L missiles armed and ready for launch. Acknowledged. Wolverine flight, prepare for weapons release on my command. But even as he spoke, Petrov found himself studying the terrain below with increased attention, searching for signs of the trap his experience insisted must be waiting. In the command bunker, Major Webb watched the radar display with the focused intensity of a man calculating the odds of his own survival. The 6 hostile contacts had spread into attack formation, their approach vectors indicating a coordinated strike designed to inflict maximum damage across multiple targets simultaneously. "Sir," Sergeant Rodriguez's voice carried professional calm despite the circumstances. "Enemy aircraft now at 5 miles and descending. Estimate 30 seconds to weapons range." Webb's eyes found the weather display showing the storm system that continued to ground their air support. 20 minutes until friendly aircraft could reach them, an eternity in tactical terms. His ground defenses consisted of 2 Stinger missiles, several .50 caliber machine guns, and whatever small arms his personnel could bring to bear. Against 6 modern fighter aircraft, the mathematics were brutal. "All units, this is Meridian Command," Webb spoke into his headset, his voice carrying to every defender across the base. "Hostile aircraft inbound for attack run. Take cover and prepare for incoming ordnance. Stinger teams, you are cleared to engage targets of opportunity." Captain Peterson stood beside the communications array, his earlier smugness replaced by genuine concern. "Sir, should we request immediate extraction for essential personnel?" "Negative. We hold this position." Webb's response was flat, definitive. "Thorne and Santos are our best chance of inflicting damage on those aircraft. Everyone else maintains defensive positions and waits for their moment." Outside, the thunder of approaching jet engines had become impossible to ignore. The MiGs were close enough now that personnel in the bunker could feel the vibration through the reinforced concrete floor. "Stinger Team 1, report status," Webb commanded. Vixen's voice came back steady and professional. "Team 1 ready for engagement. Acquiring targets now." "Stinger Team 2." "Team 2 ready, sir," Santos replied, her young voice carrying surprising confidence. Webb studied the radar display one final time, watching as the 6 contacts approached the edge of their weapons' range. In his mind, he could visualize the scene playing out above, skilled enemy pilots executing a textbook attack run against a base with minimal air defenses. The kind of scenario that military academies used as case studies in asymmetric warfare. But something in Vixen's voice during her status report had carried an undertone that Webb recognized from his own combat experience. Not fear or resignation, but the particular calm that came over experienced warriors when they found themselves in situations where conventional tactics failed and survival required innovation. "All stations, maintain radio discipline until weapons release," he ordered. "Let them make the first move." The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation, broken only by the growing roar of jet engines and the quiet hum of electronic equipment. Every person in the bunker understood that the next 60 seconds would determine whether Forward Operating Base Meridian survived the day or became another footnote in the ongoing proxy conflicts that defined modern warfare. Above them, 6 predators approached through the desert sky, unaware that their prey was calculating angles and possibilities in the narrow space between impossible and inevitable. The Stinger's acquisition tone began as a faint whisper in Vixen's headphones, growing stronger as the lead MiG entered the missile seeker range. She tracked the aircraft through her optical sight, watching it grow from a distant speck to a clearly defined predator with swept wings and twin vertical stabilizers. "Tone contact," she whispered into her headset, the words carrying to every defender across the base. The MiG was executing a textbook attack approach, low altitude, high speed, maintaining formation discipline, while presenting the smallest possible target profile. Its pilot knew his business, but knowledge was a double-edged weapon. The same tactical manual that protected him also made his actions predictable to someone who'd spent years studying aerial warfare from both perspectives. Santos, positioned 40 meters away with the second Stinger, held her weapon steady despite the growing engine noise. Through her own optical sight, she tracked the second MiG in formation, waiting for Vixen's lead. "Range now 3 miles, Rodriguez's voice crackled through their headsets. "Multiple aircraft in attack formation." Vixen's finger found the trigger, but she held fire. The Stinger's maximum effective range against fast-moving jets was theoretical. In practice, successful engagements occurred at much closer distances, where the missile's kinetic energy could overcome defensive countermeasures. "Steady, Santos," she murmured. "Let them come to us." The lead MiG continued its approach, now close enough that Vixen could make out details of its camouflage scheme and external ordnance. Two air-to-surface missiles hung beneath its wings like mechanical wasps, their guidance systems already seeking targets across the base. 2 miles. The acquisition tone in her headphones had become a steady wail, indicating optimal firing conditions. But Vixen's experience suggested waiting just a few seconds longer, allowing the aircraft to close the distance until escape became difficult rather than merely challenging. Wolverine lead to Wolverine flight. The enemy pilot's voice crackled across their monitoring frequency in accented English. Commence attack run, weapons free. The psychological warfare aspect wasn't lost on Vixen. Broadcasting in English was designed to demoralize defenders who understood they were about to be attacked. But the communication also provided valuable intelligence about timing and coordination. 1 mile, she whispered, more to herself than into the headset. The MiG pilot had begun his final approach, aircraft nose dropping slightly as he prepared for weapons release. In seconds, those air-to-surface missiles would streak toward their targets, delivering explosive death with surgical precision. Vixen's world narrowed to the view through her optical sight, where the MiG appeared to hang motionless despite its tremendous speed. Her finger tightened on the trigger as years of training merged with intuition born from countless hours in combat zones. Now, she breathed, squeezing the trigger with smooth, steady pressure. The Stinger leaped from its launcher with a sound like tearing silk, its solid-fuel motor igniting in a brilliant flash that momentarily blinded anyone looking directly at the launch. The missile streaked skyward on a pillar of white smoke, its infrared seeker head locked onto the MiG's engine signature. Major Petrov caught the launch flash in his peripheral vision, just as his weapons officer called out the missile warning over the internal communications system. SAM launch, bearing 090. The words carried professional urgency as Petrov immediately initiated evasive maneuvers, pulling his aircraft into a steep climbing turn while deploying chaff and flares in a desperate attempt to confuse the incoming missile's guidance system. The Stinger, however, had been launched from optimal range by someone who understood both its capabilities and limitations. Vixen's timing had been precise, close enough for maximum kinetic energy, with the MiG's approach vector eliminating most escape options. Wolverine 2, SAM in the air. Petrov called to his wingman while fighting his aircraft's controls. The MiG-29 was a capable fighter, but at low altitude with external ordnance, its maneuverability was significantly compromised. Captain Kozlov, flying as Wolverine 2, watched in fascination and horror as the American missile tracked his leader's aircraft with mechanical persistence. The Stinger's infrared seeker had locked onto the MiG's engine exhaust and was proving remarkably resistant to the defensive countermeasures being deployed. "Brake left, Kozlov called out, though he knew his wingman was already executing every evasive maneuver possible. Petrov's MiG twisted through the sky in a desperate dance of survival, its pilot calling upon every trick learned through 3 wars and countless training exercises. But the Stinger had been designed specifically to defeat exactly these kinds of countermeasures. Its seeker head programmed to distinguish between aircraft heat signatures and the thermal decoys being scattered across the sky. The missile struck Petrov's aircraft just after the port engine intake, its warhead detonating with devastating effect. The explosion tore through critical flight systems and fuel lines, transforming a sophisticated fighting machine into a barely controllable mass of twisted metal and spreading flames. "Wolverine lead is hit," Kozlov's voice carried shock and disbelief. "Aircraft is smoking and losing altitude." In the command bunker at FOB Meridian, radar screens painted the electronic picture of a successful engagement. The lead hostile contact had suddenly developed an erratic flight path, its altitude dropping rapidly as its airspeed decayed. "Confirm hit on lead aircraft," Sergeant Rodriguez reported, his voice carrying professional satisfaction despite the ongoing danger. Target appears to be in distress. Major Webb studied the display, watching as one of 6 death machines suddenly became a wounded bird fighting for survival. But 5 hostile aircraft remained airborne, and their mission had just transformed from demonstration to revenge. "Outstanding work, Stinger Team 1," he transmitted. "Prepare for follow-up engagements. Remaining hostiles are likely to modify their attack profile." Above the desert, Major Petrov fought his dying aircraft while his wingmen watched their formation's tactical advantage evaporate in smoke and flames. Santos watched Vixen's missile find its target, the distant explosion sending a shock wave of possibility through her nervous system. If one Stinger could bring down a MiG-29, perhaps their impossible situation had just become merely desperate. "Second missile ready," she reported into her headset, tracking another MiG as it broke from formation in response to their leader's distress. The remaining 5 aircraft had scattered across the sky, their coordinated attack plan disrupted by the sudden reality that the Americans possessed effective air defenses. Captain Kozlov, now assuming tactical command, fought to maintain mission coherence while processing the loss of his flight leader. "Wolverine flight, maintain separation and continue attack run," he ordered, though his voice carried less confidence than before. "Target appears to have limited SAM capability." Vixen had already acquired her second target, a MiG approaching from the northeast at slightly higher altitude than the first attack wave. The pilot was flying more cautiously now, probably hoping that altitude would provide some protection against shoulder-fired missiles. "Santos, take the aircraft bearing 270, she commanded. "I've got the high one coming from the northeast." "Roger, ma'am, target acquired." The tactical situation had shifted dramatically. What began as a coordinated strike against a defenseless target had become a complex engagement where both sides possessed lethal capabilities. The MiG pilots still held advantages in speed, altitude, and weapons range, but their psychological edge had evaporated with their leader's aircraft. Vixen's second target was being flown by Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov, a pilot with 60 combat missions who'd never faced American air defenses more sophisticated than rifle fire. His aircraft carried the same external ordnance as his flight leader, but his approach reflected hard-won caution rather than tactical confidence. "Acquiring tone," Vixen reported, tracking the MiG through her optical sight as it approached from a different vector than the first attack. This pilot was good, varying his altitude and speed to make targeting more difficult, probably hopping to force her into a hasty shot that would miss or be defeated by countermeasures. But Vixen's patience had been forged through years of combat where premature actions meant death. "Steady," she whispered to herself, watching the aircraft grow larger in her sight picture. The MiG pilot had begun his attack run, probably hopping to release his ordnance and escape before the Americans could achieve another missile lock. His calculation was reasonable. Shoulder-fired missiles had limited range and relatively slow acceleration compared to aircraft-mounted weapons. But he was operating on incomplete information about his opponent's capabilities and experience. "Range optimal," Vixen said quietly, her finger finding the trigger. "Fox 2. The second Stinger leaped skyward with the same tearing silk sound, its motor igniting in another brilliant flash as it began its pursuit of the MiG flying overhead. Lieutenant Volkov saw the second missile launch and immediately initiated aggressive evasive maneuvers, his aircraft rolling inverted before diving toward the desert floor in a desperate attempt to break the Stinger's lock. Unlike his flight leader, Volkov had precious seconds of warning and used them to deploy every defensive system available. Chaff bloomed behind his aircraft like metallic flowers, designed to confuse radar-guided missiles. Flares spread across the sky in patterns calculated to overwhelm infrared seekers. His MiG twisted through 3 dimensions as he fought to present the smallest possible heat signature while maintaining control at dangerously low altitude. Wolverine 4 has SAM inbound. He called over the tactical frequency, his voice tight with concentration and fear. But Vixen's second shot had been fired under near-perfect conditions, optimal range, clear line of sight, and a target aircraft constrained by its attack profile. The Stinger tracked through Volkov's defensive maneuvers with mechanical persistence, its guidance system programmed to distinguish between aircraft engines and thermal decoys. In her position near the base perimeter, Santos had acquired her own target and was waiting for the optimal moment to engage. The MiG she tracked was flying a wider pattern, its pilot having observed 2 successful American launches and concluded that careful timing would be essential for survival. "Target in range," Santos reported, her voice carrying steady professionalism despite the enormous pressure of the moment. "Cleared to engage," Vixen responded, watching her own missile close the distance to Lieutenant Volkov's aircraft. The desert sky had become a 3-dimensional chess game played at supersonic speeds, where each move carried consequences measured in tons of twisted metal and human lives. The MiG pilots retained significant advantages in firepower and mobility, but their psychological dominance had been shattered by the reality of effective ground-based air defenses. Captain Kozlov, now leading the remaining aircraft, found himself commanding a mission that had transformed from demonstration to survival. His original orders called for precision strikes against specific targets, but the tactical situation demanded immediate adaptation to preserve his remaining pilots and aircraft. "Wolverine flight, break off attack and assume defensive formation," he commanded, making the difficult decision to abort their mission rather than lose more aircraft to American missiles. But military momentum was difficult to reverse, and 3 MiGs had already committed to attack runs that would bring them within range of additional Stinger launches. The mathematics of aerial combat were unforgiving. Aircraft moving at hundreds of miles per hour couldn't simply stop or reverse course without consequences. Vixen's second missile found its target just as Lieutenant Volkov thought he'd successfully evaded. The Stinger's warhead detonated against the MiG's starboard wing, severing control surfaces and fuel lines in a cascade of destruction that immediately transformed the fighter into a barely controllable mass of metal and flames. "Wolverine 4 is hit," Volkov's wingman called out, watching his comrade's aircraft begin its final descent toward the desert floor. The engagement had claimed 2 enemy aircraft in less than 90 seconds. Major Petrov's MiG-29 struck the desert at nearly 200 miles per hour, the impact sending up a pillar of sand and smoke visible for miles across the barren landscape. His ejection seat had functioned perfectly, carrying him clear of the wreckage seconds before impact, but the skilled pilot who'd begun the day commanding 6 aircraft was now drifting toward Earth beneath a silk parachute. Lieutenant Volkov's aircraft followed 30 seconds later, carving a burning furrow through the sand as its pilot fought unsuccessfully to maintain control with severed flight surfaces. His ejection came at the last possible moment, barely giving his seat enough altitude to function properly. From the command bunker, Major Webb watched the radar display as 2 hostile contacts disappeared from his screens. 6 aircraft had become 4 in less than 2 minutes, a transformation that shifted the tactical balance from hopeless to merely desperate. "Confirmed kills on 2 hostile aircraft," Sergeant Rodriguez reported, his voice carrying professional satisfaction. "Remaining contacts appear to be aborting attack run." But Webb's experience warned against premature celebration. For MiG-29 still carried enough ordnance to level his base, and their pilots had just watched 2 comrades shot down by weapons they'd probably underestimated. The psychological dynamic had shifted from confidence to anger, which could make the remaining attackers either more cautious or more reckless. "All units maintain defensive positions," he ordered, This engagement is not over. Captain Kozlov had assumed tactical command of the remaining aircraft, his voice carrying across the radio frequency as he tried to reorganize his scattered formation. Wolverine Flight, form up on me at Angels 12. We're modifying the attack profile. The surviving MiGs began climbing to higher altitude, probably hoping that increased distance would provide some protection against additional Stinger launches. Their pilots had learned hard lessons about American defensive capabilities, but military pride and mission requirements made complete withdrawal unlikely. Santos had tracked her target throughout the engagement, waiting for the optimal firing opportunity that would maximize her chances of success. The MiG she'd selected was being flown by Senior Lieutenant Pavel Khrushchev, a pilot with limited combat experience who joined the formation specifically to gain exposure to complex tactical situations. Target bearing 270, range decreasing, she reported into her headset. Vixen had moved to a new position after her second successful launch, carrying her remaining Stinger to a location that would provide better fields of fire against aircraft approaching from multiple vectors. The base's defensive plan had called for mobility between shots, preventing enemy pilots from targeting known launch positions. "Santos, you have the shot when ready," Vixen transmitted. "I'm repositioning for follow-up engagement." The tactical situation remained fluid, with 4 hostile aircraft still circling the base like mechanical vultures. Their pilots were skilled professionals who'd absorbed hard lessons about American capabilities and were now calculating new approaches that might allow them to complete their mission while minimizing additional losses. But time was working against them, as every minute that passed brought friendly air support closer to the engagement area. Senior Lieutenant Khrushchev had watched 2 of his comrades die in the span of 90 seconds, their aircraft transformed from sophisticated weapons platforms into burning wreckage scattered across the desert floor. The psychological impact was devastating. His training had prepared him for many combat scenarios, but not for facing defenders who could reach out and touch fast-moving jets with shoulder-fired missiles. "Wolverine 3 to lead," he called to Captain Kozlov. "Request permission to abort attack run and return to base." Kozlov's response carried the weight of command authority and personal frustration. "Negative, Wolverine 3. Mission parameters require target engagement. Modify approach to maintain standoff distance." The order made tactical sense, but ignored the emotional reality of facing weapons that had already proven their effectiveness. Khrushchev found himself flying a machine worth $20 million, while knowing that somewhere below, American defenders were tracking his movement through optical sights attached to missiles specifically designed to kill aircraft like his. Santos maintained her target acquisition, tracking the MiG through her Stinger's optical sight as it circled at higher altitude. The pilot was flying more cautiously now, probably hoping that increased distance would provide protection against ground-based air defenses. "Target acquired and locked," she reported, her voice steady despite the pressure of knowing that multiple lives hung in the balance of her next decision. The mathematics of missile engagement were unforgiving at extended range. The Stinger's motor would burn for only a few seconds, providing limited energy for interception at maximum distance. But Santos had observed Vixen's successful tactics and understood that patience often mattered more than perfect technical conditions. "Range still decreasing," she added, watching the MiG gradually lose altitude as its pilot prepared for another attack approach. Khrushchev's tactical training emphasized the importance of speed and surprise in ground attack missions. His MiG carried air-to-surface missiles with standoff capability, allowing him to engage targets from several miles away. But accuracy at maximum range was problematic, especially against point targets protected by air defenses. He made his decision based on incomplete information and youthful confidence, beginning a shallow dive that would bring him closer to his targets while hopefully remaining outside the envelope of American shoulder-fired missiles. Wolverine 3 commencing attack run, he reported to Captain Kozlov. Santos watched the MiGs approach vector develop, recognizing the pilot's intent several seconds before optimal engagement range. Her training had emphasized the importance of leading fast-moving targets, calculating interception points based on relative velocities and missile performance characteristics. Target committed to attack profile, she reported into her headset. Engaging now. Her finger found the trigger, squeezing with smooth, steady pressure that released the third stinger of the engagement. The missile leaped skyward with familiar fury, its motor igniting in another brilliant flash as it began pursuit of Senior Lieutenant Khrushchev's aircraft. The desert had become a proving ground where technology and training merged with human courage and desperation. The third stinger climbed through the desert air with mechanical determination, its infrared seeker locked onto the heat signature of Khrushchev's MiG-29. Unlike the previous two engagements, this missile had been launched at near maximum range, requiring every joule of its solid fuel motor's energy to achieve interception. Khrushchev saw the launch flash and immediately initiated evasive maneuvers, his aircraft rolling into a steep diving turn that would theoretically defeat the missile's tracking capability. His defensive systems activated automatically. Chaff and flares bloomed behind his aircraft in patterns designed by engineers who'd studied American missile technology. SAM launch, Wolverine 3 defensive. He called over the tactical frequency, his voice tight with concentration. But Santos had timed her shot with precision born from careful observation. The MiG's attack profile had committed its pilot to a predictable flight path, eliminating many of the evasive options that might have defeated an earlier launch. Captain Kozlov watched from higher altitude as the third American missile streaked toward his subordinate's aircraft. Two successful launches had already demonstrated that these defenders possessed both effective weapons and the skill to employ them. The tactical situation had deteriorated beyond acceptable parameters. Wolverine flight, abort mission and return to base, he ordered, making the difficult decision to preserve his remaining aircraft rather than risk additional losses. But Khrushchev's MiG was already committed to its evasive maneuvers, and the Stinger tracking him had been launched under conditions that favored successful interception. The mathematics of aerial combat were about to claim another victim. Vixen had moved to her final firing position, carrying the base's last Stinger to a location that would allow engagement of any aircraft attempting to complete attack runs against critical targets. Her experience suggested that the enemy formation was beginning to break apart under pressure, but individual pilots might still attempt to salvage the mission through desperate attacks. Stinger Team 1 in position for final engagement, she reported to Major Webb. In the command bunker, radar screens showed the complex aerial ballet unfolding above Fob Meridian. 4 hostile contacts remained airborne, but their formation discipline was fragmenting as individual pilots made independent decisions about risk and mission requirements. Confirmed third missile in flight, Sergeant Rodriguez reported. Target appears to be maneuvering defensively. The Stinger's solid fuel motor burned out after 4 seconds, but the missile retained sufficient kinetic energy to continue its pursuit of Khrushchev's aircraft. Its guidance system had locked onto the MiG's engine exhaust and proved remarkably resistant to the countermeasures being deployed. Senior Lieutenant Khrushchev executed every evasive maneuver in his tactical repertoire, his aircraft twisting through 3 dimensions as he fought to break the missile's lock. His MiG-29 was a capable,